trip to Ecuador. See? Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
So when the mission trip to Ecuador was announced in Calgary, something was stirred inside of me to want to go, to do something. But that do something wasn't quite well formed yet. All I knew that God was leading and that I was to follow. When the time drew closer and plans were coming together, it still didn't seem quite real to me yet. Until the day that was to leave, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to Ecuador. And I became very scared. It was just too big for me. And these thoughts were coming in my head that it was Calgary going. I didn't know them prior to the trip. I didn't know the language. How was I going to be able to communicate with these people that I was going there, and how are they going to be able to communicate with me? I didn't know the country. All these food precautions were being imposed upon us that you have to worry about. And there's all this foreignness that was being imposed upon me on my familiar routine. So I prayed and I asked God, asked Him to watch over me while I was going to be so far away from my home. And while I was there, I began to realize just how big God is, and that He's everywhere. And His beauty was present both in the geography and the people of Ecuador. And the word that kept coming into my mind was majesty. What stood out the most for me in Ecuador was the grandness of the mountains. The Andes are just so big and rich and lush. And the Appalachian Mountains here in this area are just nothing compared to the Andes. And I don't know if anyone's ever been in Grand Canyon. It's like when you first step over and you look at the Grand Canyon, you see that vista. It's just breathtaking. And that's the way I felt when I first looked at the Andes Mountains. And we were just so up close and personal with them all week long. And while we were working on building this foundation for this church, we were, we had surrounded by these mountains. And there were these two mountains that they were just never the same. And I was having this conversation with this one mountain always called Mountain Gobora. And while I was working trying rebar all week and to prepare for this foundation that we were going to be pouring, I kept looking up at this mountain. She just kept showing off her beauty to me, and outdoing herself to me all day. I would look up in the morning and say, wow, that's just awesome, and that just can't be outdone. And then in the afternoon I would look up and say, wow, that's awesome. And it was as if God was trying to bring Himself over on me. And it was the same with the people, working alongside of them, hearing their stories, hearing how God had worked in their hearts. And there was this one, on Sunday service, I didn't expect for it to affect me as much as it did. After all, it was in Spanish, and how would I even understand it? But that didn't matter. Pastor George was standing behind some of us. He was translating some of the lyrics during the worship time. And the words just spoke to me, and I understood. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just the words of the song. It was just being surrounded by the other people, the other Ecuadorians during the service, and all the worshiping and the loving of the Lord, just as we do here. And I realized that He, isn't just in my situation, my problems, and in our country, that He works everywhere simultaneously, and that He unites us in song, and spirit, and words, and friendship, and love, and in the same way. And although the prime reason that we went was to work, to help the Ecuadorians on their church, after coming home and reflecting on the trip a bit, realizing that my purpose and my journey was to strengthen something that I had asked God right from the very beginning, and that was to trust. God, will you watch over me? Can you do that, Lord, so very far away from my home? Going to Ecuador made me see that God is so big, and that He's everywhere, and His home is everywhere. It's inside of you, inside of me, it's inside of each and every person that I met while I was in Ecuador. And it was even on Mountain Gobora that I looked at each day while I was in tying rebar. And I was never alone. God was with me the whole time, and I just had to trust Him. What was so cool was that He just kept showing Himself to me the whole time I was there. And I'm just awestruck by majesty. Thank you.
saw this video of Stephanie Roberts who went on the Mexico team.